As a kid, I wasn't a fan of bread pudding because of its soggy and mushy texture. That was until I tried Oatly. It's an Egyptian pudding that uses pastry rather than bread to get around the mushiness problem. That gives you all the decadence of the pudding with a fantastic texture instead. This week, Oatly invited us to take part in their Will It Swap challenge. So not only will we cook a dairy Oatly, but we'll also make an identical one using Oatly's plant-based ingredients. This is a live experiment that we haven't tried before, and it might not even work. We'll get Selma to do a blind taste test later and give us her opinion. In the meantime, thanks to Oatly for sponsoring this video, and after you watch our attempt, you can see other people take on the Will It Swap challenge by clicking the link in the description below. Let's go over the basic idea of Oatly. You place pastry in a baking dish, add nuts and sultanas, pour over sweetened milk and cream, and then bake until golden. The traditional pastry can be a pain to make, so to save us some time we'll use croissants as a shortcut, as they have loads of layers which gives us the same effect. But before we use them, we need to dry them out so that they don't go soggy when we add our liquid. Start by deconstructing them into bite-sized pieces. Using a bread knife, cut off both corners and then slice the croissants in half and chop them into chunks. Once you have a big pile like this, take a baking tray and add on the pieces. Arrange them so that they aren't overlapping and the inner white part is facing upwards. Place the tray into your oven and bake it at 180°C for about 6 to 8 minutes until golden. That should crisp up the chunks, and when they come out they should be crunchy and dry. That will give us the sog-free pudding we're aiming for, even when we add our liquid. While they're baking, figure out what toppings you want to add to your Oatly. Any sort of nut works well in Oatly, especially walnuts, pistachios, almonds and hazelnuts. Additionally, shredded coconut is quite a popular topping, and we usually add sultanas or raisins as well. To keep the experiment consistent, we're going to use hazelnuts and sultanas in both our samples, though my favourite topping is pistachio and coconut. You can optionally roast the nuts to bring out more flavour. Chop the nuts into smaller pieces, add them to a baking tray and bake for about 2 to 4 minutes until lightly toasted. When they're ready, we can assemble the Oatly. You'll need a couple of deep ramekins to fill with the croissant pieces. Add enough chunks to slightly overfill them like this, then we can add on the toppings. To each one I'll add a small handful of the sultanas and then do the same thing with the roasted hazelnuts. Now that's looking pretty identical to me, so we can sort out the liquids. For the regular dairy one, we'll add brown sugar, white sugar and whole milk to a pot and then mix those together. Heat the pot on medium and bring the milk up to a very light simmer. Once it starts to steam and lightly bubble, it's ready to use. We also need a second dairy in the form of thick cream to top the pudding, so I'm going to use clotted cream for that. For the plant-based one, I'm going to use the Oatly Barista Edition Oat Drink in the liquid. This is specially formulated to have a creamier and foamier texture and withstand being heated without curdling. I'm going to take this even further by adding some extra creaminess to the oat drink in the form of Oatly's Creamy Oat. We'll add that mixture into a pot and the same amount of brown sugar and white sugar. Now for the first tricky part, we've got to heat this mixture until it's steaming. There is a risk that the oat drink could curdle when it's heated, but because we used the Barista Edition oat drink, it came to a simmer perfectly. As for the extra thick cream, we'll take the Whippable Oat and whisk that up until it thickens. It whipped up perfectly, and although it's very airy, I think it will do the job. Right before you're ready to serve, combine the liquids with the pastry. You don't want to do this ahead of time because eventually the pastry will get too wet. I'll place the ramekins onto a baking tray and the left one is going to be the Oatly one. First I poured over the sweetened liquid until the ramekin is almost full, and then I pushed down the chunks of pastry so they all get submerged. I did the same thing with the dairy one as well, making sure every piece was dunked. After that it's time to add the whipped creamy oat. This will melt as it cooks, so a few spoonfuls of that were placed evenly around the pastry. And I did the same thing with the clotted cream, and so far they're looking pretty similar. Last thing was to give each one a light dusting of brown sugar, which will caramelize in the oven. And here's our prepared ramekins. So far they look pretty similar, but I'm not too sure about the creamy oat surviving in the oven. Set your grill or broiler to medium and then slide in the tray with the ramekins. Let them broil for about 4 to 8 minutes until the cream is melted and they're browned on top. My first ones got a little too close to the broiler and burnt a little, but they were totally edible and didn't look too bad once garnished. This second batch is what you should be aiming for instead, and I was quite surprised to see that they looked identical. You can't tell which is which, and to me that is a win. You've got about 30 minutes until the pastry softens, so dig in while it's nice and hot. Let's check in with Selma to see what she thinks of the two varieties. Do you think it's going to taste good?
Skeptical.
Right, this is the first one. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Good.
Can hardly tell the difference between both.
Oh wow, I want to try it.
It works.
Oh, that works so well, the flavour's so nice. So there you have it, that was clearly a smashing success. That plant-based Oatly turned out perfect. Thanks again to Oatly for sponsoring this video, and don't forget to check out their Will It Swap playlist by clicking the link in the description box. And if you could think of other Middle Eastern recipes that would work well with the same substitutes, leave a comment down below.